Okay, thank you, everyone. Um, I am Sandra Charletta. I'm the Assistant Director of Administration for CM2, and I just wanted to do a quick introduction for both of our guest speakers today. First, we're going to begin with Max Bernhardt, who is a second-year CRP master student here at UT Austin. Max is going to be discussing with us his research that he's been working with Dr. Kara Kalkelman on, which is presenting on pedestrian crash fatality analysis that is being doing for TxDOT. So Max will be doing his presentation, and then the last 10 minutes we'll have for Q&A that we can open up for his presentation. At 4 o'clock, Mr. Lonnie Stern of Capital Metro will be joining us to talk about Project Connect, which is the region's transportation system plan that is currently moving forward here in Austin. And so Lonnie will be doing his presentation, and we'll be having a Q&A afterwards for that. If you have questions during the presentation, as I mentioned, you're welcome to put it in the group chat, and I'll make sure to follow up with those questions once we get to the Q&A part. So let's go ahead and begin. I will end my screen share so that Max can take over. Thanks.
Perfect, Jess. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. Let's see, can everyone see that? There it should be in presentation mode. Perfect. All right, yeah, so like Sandra said, my name is Max Bernhardt. I think most of you in here I have class with, so everyone pretty much knows me. But for the past about 10 months, I've been working on a project with Dr. Kara Kalkelman in the Department of Civil Engineering here at UT. This is a TxDOT project, basically looking at developing countermeasures for lowering pedestrian crash fatalities and injuries across the state of Texas. So, oh my goodness. So over the past few years, basically since 2010, ped crashes and ped fatalities in Texas have been rising. They've been rising both in terms of absolute numbers, and the rates have actually risen slightly as well. Additionally, they've also risen as a percentage of the total crash deaths across all modes. So for example, in 2010, pedestrian crash fatalities accounted for 13% of all total crash fatalities in the United States. In 2018, that number was up to 17%. Furthermore, in Texas, that mode share was about 12%, rising to about 18% by 2018. Speaking with some experts around Austin, including at the Austin Police Department, they estimate that about 40 to 50% of Austin's pedestrian crashes go unreported. That's for a variety of factors I can get into here in a little bit, but that's just something to keep in mind as we look at these numbers, that we're dealing mostly with reported pedestrian crashes. A lot of those are minor, but also some of those might not be reported or go into official state databases because they do not happen on a public road, for example. So oftentimes, like if a pedestrian crash is in a parking lot or if it occurs on private property, there is a very large chance, depending on the state, that actually will not go into into the data sets that we've been working with. So that's just something to keep in mind as we go. So as you can see down here, pedestrian deaths have been increasing, as well as a function of VMT, which of course has been rising as well. So walk miles per day per person have increased slightly from the National Household Travel Survey in 2000 to the most recent one in 2017, but it's a pretty trivial increase. Additionally, you can see there that fatalities per million VMT have also increased across the United States. Two kind of hypotheses that we've put forward throughout our research are the use of smartphones among drivers, particularly, but also one that has a little bit more research and a little bit more numbers behind it as of now are how vehicle sales trends have changed over the years. So as you can see down here, this is a graph from the Energy and Information Administration, EIA, showing from 2012 to 2018, basically after the end of the recession. The share of SUVs as a percentage of the total vehicle fleet has increased dramatically. And with that, sedans and other smaller vehicles, particularly compact cars, have decreased. So, you see fewer like very large vehicles on the road now, but you also see way fewer very small vehicles. So that increases, the hood height, that increases grills. So that is one area that we're currently investigating for potentially being responsible for increasing the severity of the crashes. So going into some of the factors that will make a crash more likely to be severe, walk speeds and age effects are one big trend that we've seen. Persons aged 65 and up tend to walk significantly slower than those under 65. There's been some studies, for example, in Utah with signal timing as a potential countermeasure there in terms of giving leading intervals for pedestrians when they're trying to cross the street, allowing them to get out in front of traffic sooner so that they're more visible, things like that to account for slower walking speeds. A study by Brian Teff from 2013 showed that being 70 basically delivers the same death risk if you're hit, if the vehicle hit you at a 11.8 mile per hour higher speed. So in other words, if you're 30 and you were hit at 40 miles an hour, that's as if when you're 70, that's as if you're getting hit at 51.8 miles per hour. So there's a significantly higher risk for those older pedestrians. Additionally, the effects of vehicle speed are very apparent, and there'll be a couple graphs on the succeeding slides showing those trends in Texas. There's a 90% risk of death across pedestrian crashes in the United States if the person's hit at 55 miles per hour. Essentially, that kind of critical zone for speeds is between 25 and 40 miles an hour, where there's about a 3% added fatality risk for every 1 mile an hour increase. And then the median impact speeds across all crashes in the US, it's about 14 miles per hour for injury, so relatively slow for most public roads in the United States, versus about 35 miles per hour for pedestrians that are killed, which of course is a pretty standard speed limit across the US. So for our data analysis for this project, we basically went through TxDOT's statewide motor vehicle traffic database called the Crash Records Information System, or CRIS. And again, this is for the reported or recorded crashes only. We analyzed about 5.6 million crashes since 2010. We picked 2010 mostly because that was one of the years where the rates started increasing significantly. Additionally, the data set changed significantly between 2009 and 2010. It allowed for a little bit more fluid data analysis. So CRIS data is extracted mostly from police reports that police officers in the state of Texas are required to file at the time of a crash. So it goes over crash type, injury severity, location, time, where on the road it occurred. Oftentimes there'll be diagrams, things like that. Not all of that makes it into the CRIS record. So currently we're actually investigating individual police records that we've obtained through TxDOT in order to kind of get a better idea of how these crashes are reported on, what kind of information might be missing, things like that. Additionally, they do provide the vehicle characteristics. So what type of vehicle it was, how fast the vehicle was traveling, things like that. And additionally, other things like the lighting characteristics, and then also the person characteristics. Who was the pedestrian that was killed, and who were the occupants of the vehicle as well, though, for privacy reasons, and it's not really particularly of much use for us when evaluating these records. So then in the inventory, TxDOT maintains a very comprehensive roadway inventory. I've already added for our class with Ming Xiang, I've already added some of the TxDOT geometry just because it's the most current, and they also include land use details, topography, climate, all these things, all these variables through which we can run regressions and other types of analyses to determine which factors are the most salient. Oops, there we go. So this is a little bit of a graph here looking at the age. So you can see here that in Texas, this is again from Texas 2010 to 2018, you can see that the highest fatality rates are among older working adults, essentially those years. So from about 45 until about 65. And then again, a kind of a smaller peak among younger people as well. The overwhelming majority of pedestrians that are killed in Texas are male. And then about 58% of them, so the plurality, fall within kind of that middle age range of 20 to 54. About 30% of those that are killed have drugs or alcohol in their systems at the time of death, though that number has been decreasing over the years, for potential number of reasons. But again, those older working adults are kind of the main demographic that stood out to us in terms of ages of the most vulnerable people. And again, going back to speed as a theme, as you can very clearly see in this graph, as the speed limit goes up, the chances of a pedestrian getting killed, or excuse me, rather the speed limit and the actual vehicle speed, because of course there can be a difference there, goes up over time, as as the speed limit increases rather. And of course, the share that are experiencing non-incapacitating injuries go down as speed limit goes down. So you can see there at about, what is that, speeds of over 60, about 35% of pedestrians that are hit are killed. Looking at time of day, because lighting on the street, as well as different activities that may be going on the road or off the road, are significant factors. You can see that later in the evening tends to be the most deadly time to be on the road as a pedestrian, additionally with early in the morning. So we're kind of thinking dawn and dusk, but overall about 80% of those deaths occur in the overnight hours, with another peak there in the evening rush hour. And then again, about 41% of pedestrian deaths occur over the weekend. So that's anywhere from Friday at 7 to Sunday at midnight. So about Saturday night typically is about the time when a pedestrian is most likely to get killed on a roadway in Texas. So looking at the rates between Texas cities, you can see here that Austin has one of the higher rates among all Texas cities. Again, I just want to stress these are recorded rates. We know, speaking with Austin Police Department, other sources throughout the Austin area, that Austin has a exceptionally high rate of pedestrian fatalities among people experiencing homelessness. So that's another factor to consider when looking at this data, but also, for Austin in particular, given what we know about the data set. But overall, Texas has very high rates of pedestrian fatality. A woman named Angie Schmidt, who recently authored a book on pedestrian safety, she created basically this index called the Pedestrian Danger Index, has Texas as the 8th most dangerous state in the United States to be a pedestrian. So I would definitely pay attention to those rates. They're high and they're increasing. So again, the top 5 Texas cities, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, and Fort Worth, which are about 36% of the Texas population. Those are going to be where all the highest rates are. On the left is a heat map, basically pulled from the CRIS database that shows the concentrations of crashes across the state. As expected, the cities contain most of the pedestrian crashes and fatalities. I would also note, though, too, that the increase in pedestrian fatalities that we've seen over the last 10 years or so has been concentrated almost exclusively in cities. So the increase in rural areas, I believe, is less than about 0.3%. Whereas the increase in urban areas is somewhere in the range of 20 to 30%, as we had talked about earlier. Dallas did have the highest rate. However, Austin did have the highest proportion of pedestrian deaths. However, they also had the highest number of walk miles traveled per year, which is about 84 miles per year, which is actually still significantly less than the US average for all cities. So pedestrian activity in Austin is actually lower than the national average, but pedestrian fatalities are significantly higher than the national average. So recently what we've been doing is we've been going through basically we've been looking through records to determine which are the most dangerous sites. I've started off by doing a qualitative review, and then I'll move into a quantitative review that actually rates the dangerousness of the sites throughout the state. As far as the qualitative review, the biggest thing that we uncovered is that a lot of the hotspots within the major metropolitan areas in Texas tend to be in commercial corridors, much like the one that you see below. That's actually a corridor along Highway 54 in El Paso. There's a lot of curb cuts, a lot of driveways, a lot of areas where cars are coming in and out of the road. Additionally, there's long periods of time or long stretches of the road where there's no crosswalks. So the lack of mid-block crossings plays a very large role in increasing the risk for pedestrian injury or fatality. Additionally, we see a worrying number of pedestrian injury and fatality along freeways in Texas, as well as arterials. Those of you that are not from Texas will know that in most other states, we have some kind of sound barrier, some kind of way to prevent pedestrians from getting onto the freeway. In Texas, of course, in most parts of the state, that is not so. So we've seen, for example, on I-35 north of Austin recently, they've been installing higher barriers. They've been stenciling, like no pedestrian signs on the side of the road, things like that. But unfortunately, in Texas, that's a particular trend that we see. And of course, the last trend that we see is just areas of higher pedestrian activity. So there are more people out on the road. We see this a lot along some of the border crossings in Texas. We see this a lot along 6th Street in Austin, the Montrose and Houston areas where there's a lot of bars, things like that. So where there's a lot of cars interfacing with a lot of pedestrians, that's where you're going to see the highest injury and death rates. Looking at Austin specifically, about 28% of Austin's ped deaths are on I-35. And these are concentrated in three major areas: along downtown, so basically between 15th and Senator Chavez, just north of the river. Along South Congress, there's kind of a minor cluster, particularly there, I think that's South Congress and Stastny. But again, there's kind of where there's major transit points or major commercial centers, namely. And then lastly, along the northern part of I-35 in Austin, around the 290, 183 area. That's going to be along Lamar, Runberg, near Capitol Plaza. All of those areas have very, very high rates of pedestrian injury relative to the city. And again, according to the Austin Police Department, which just started tracking pedestrian injury and death among persons experiencing homelessness, about 55% in 2019 were among those experiencing homelessness. Finally, just some images of other hotspots in Austin, just to kind of get the point across. Here you can see an unprotected crosswalk at I-35, and I believe that's 7th. It's either 6th or 7th, right down by the convention center. So there again, you have very high volume road with a lot of pedestrians coming out of downtown. There's going to be a lot of conflict there. Additionally, the photos on the bottom are near the HEB at Runberg and Lamar. That's an area where it's very high pedestrian activity interfaced with high speed limits, high traffic volumes, and a lack of crossing. So all of this kind of combines to create the hotspots that we see throughout Texas. For my own work, additionally, we did a ordinary least squares regression to kind of predict the amount of ped crashes per vehicle miles traveled and ped deaths per vehicle miles traveled as a function of a number of things, including roadway factors. So we're looking at like lane miles per capita, average number of lanes, average speed limit within the county. So we did this for the 254 counties of Texas. We did take into account homelessness using the most recent point in time data, demographic variables such as population growth, income per capita, and the environment, which includes heating degree days, cooling degree days, rainfall, things like that. The strongest predictors were mostly consistent across both crash rates and fatality rates. We did want to make that distinction. Job density, increases along with ped crash rates. But strangely enough, population density actually decreases along with ped crash rates. And again, that VMT weighted average speed limit decreases along with ped crash rates as well, suggesting that urban areas, of course, are going to be where the highest rate of crash rates are. In terms of fatality rates, mostly the same pattern. Somewhat curiously, and this is something we're continuing to investigate, is why counties, it seems like closer to the coast, seem to have higher fatality rates. That could be for a number of factors, but you can see that areas with lower maximum temperatures tend to have lower crash rates, whereas areas with higher minimum temperatures tend to have higher crash rates, which points us more towards the coastal counties of Texas. In terms of countermeasures, I could talk about them for hours, but this is just sort of a broad overview of some of the countermeasures we've been discussing. There have been specific targeted programs in the past, such as Safe Routes to School, that have lowered pedestrian injury rates by 42.5%. Most of this was targeted in areas that had schools around those hotspots. So again, areas in North Austin, East Austin, South Austin, that had a lot of neighborhood elementary schools, middle schools, and that's had a marked impact on the school zone areas. New York City is perhaps the jurisdiction in the U.S. that has had the most comprehensive pedestrian safety regime, you could say. Streets with bike lanes are about 40% less deadly in New York now. Speed humps continue to lower speeds by about 20% or so, which of course then reduces rates of pedestrian crash injury and fatality. Educational campaigns is something we've really kind of taken a skeptical look at throughout this study, just kind of seeing whether there's really any efficacy to them. We've basically found that among school-age children, they tend to be more effective rather than just for the general public. And then again, complete streets policies are things that we need to continue to examine. Things like road diets, things like increasing the frequency of crosswalks, particularly marked crosswalks that have some kind of something on them that alerts the driver, things like that. So there's lots of things with countermeasures. That's just kind of a brief overview for you there. So our next steps in this project, basically we're just going to go through and describe all types of potential treatments. There's an NHTSA report that we're reading right now that kind of goes through those treatments and will help us to kind of describe these to TxDOT. We will be doing a benefit cost analysis to determine which treatments provide the most benefit for the least amount of cost to TxDOT. And then we will, like I said, we'll be ranking 200 discrete sites in Texas for treatment. and making some policy recommendations as well. So I hope I didn't take too much time, but that's basically my research in a nutshell.
Great, thank you so much, Max. If anybody has any questions, I can unmute so that you can ask. I guess I think the clapping is either like real clapping or a question. So if anyone has a question, perhaps like let me know and I'll unmute. I think perhaps like the clap emoji would work. Hi, Ming. I believe you have a question.
Yes.
Great.
Well, thank you, Max. Very, very interesting study. And I know the data is so massive and messy, and working out some useful information, insights into crashes, causing factors, a very challenging task. Quick question, maybe one or two. You showed the crash rates by like a different time of day, and then the age and the gender dimensions. I wonder if you have any information to cross-tab along the, for example, income and racial groups to show the distribution of crashes among those different ethnic groups, for example, income classes.
Yeah, so without getting too much into detail, for the purpose of the TxDOT project, we haven't done that. I will be doing that for my own PR.
Oh, great.
Yeah, but basically what we found though too is, particularly in regards to income, we did not find a particularly significant relationship in terms of like at the city level. We haven't found a significant relationship, but again, for my PR, I'm definitely going to want to dive in a little bit more and get that at a census tract level, because almost assuredly there's going to be some significant differences due to income level throughout. But yeah, for the purposes of this study, we've mostly just taken a look at age and speed, because they're two of the things that that TxDOT has been looking for. But yeah, that's definitely something I want to dive into personally. We have that data available, but I'm working on putting together another model right now that has walk miles traveled as the Y. So another ordinarily least squares regression that has the walk miles traveled as the Y instead of vehicle miles traveled. So just to see in tracks that have higher walking activity, and then for those as well, we can put in race and income as potential variables as well. So I did run one of the regressions with those variables in place. Now across counties, which again is a very broad geographic definition, which of course is going to encounter many diverse groups of people in an entire county. We didn't see as strong of an effect for race and income as we did for some of these other variables. But again, I think that's something that would be better run at the tract level. And so that's something that I'm going to be working on for my PR.
Great, thank you.
I'll get back to you.
Well, I do not want to dominate the time for question and answer. Leave it for some other people to ask questions.
Oh, we have a question here in the group chat. Are you able to consider other factors that have an impact about the survival or death rate, like a person's health, or is that information inaccessible due to privacy protection?
So yeah, two things on that. So one, there are oftentimes, again, going into that reported versus unreported, there are oftentimes where we basically talking with hospitals, talking with local police departments, things like that, we've determined that actually hospitals do not report a lot of people that come in. So those people's identities, even if we wanted to investigate it more, a lot of those people's identities are not known, especially if a crash goes unreported with the police, but someone ends up checking themselves into the hospital, which is a surprisingly common thing in Texas. then, that information unfortunately is unknown. Additionally, typically, police reports don't really include health information. So that's a major limitation of this data, is it really doesn't tell us really much about the person. It doesn't really tell us, it doesn't really tell us their race usually. It doesn't really tell us their income level, of course. In many cases, people don't even have IDs on them. So there's very little information that we usually have at the person level. So the best we can usually do is go off of the health indicators of those census tracts or those cities or whichever, geographic level you want to analyze. And so that's going to be a next step for me, again, is looking more at those types of variables in a more localized setting, because that's really where you're going to get the most, I guess that finer data is really going to be where you're going to be able to uncover those trends. So, it's a good idea. I mean, I need to definitely do more research on different health indicators and how those things are tracked across, smaller localities. But at this point, we haven't done that, unfortunately.
Excellent. So, Max, I think you did such a good job. Everybody's just thrilled, and there's no other questions at the moment. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you, everyone. We'll go ahead now, and I would like to introduce our second guest speaker, Mr. Lonnie Stern, who is the Community Engagement Administrator at Capital Metro. Thank you so much, Lonnie, for taking the time to join us today in our brown bag. Lonnie will be spending some time with us to discuss Project Connect, which is the region's transportation system plan that is moving forward for Austin and the region. Like I mentioned for Max's presentation, it will be about 20 minutes. If you have any questions, put it in the chat, and we'll have 10 minutes after Lonnie's presentation for back and forth. All right, thank you guys. I'll let Lonnie go ahead and take it over.
All right, well, hello everybody. Thanks for being here today, and hopefully you've heard of Project Connect before and are sitting on a bunch of questions. Certainly while I'm doing the presentation, I'm happy to answer them. And if you have other questions about land use, transit-oriented development, I could probably tackle some of them too. And I'll even put in a resource for a recent Urban Land Institute proposal about TOD in the region. That'll help. But first, let's get started with the briefing you're expecting, which is about Project Connect. And again, this presentation is for the summer version. We've got a new one coming up this fall, but the details have been locked in. And so what I'm going to present today is an overview of Project Connect generally. Then we'll talk about the system plan overview and go mode by mode and line by line what things are there. And this is an important distinction. The system plan is the whole plan, and then the initial investment is a smaller chunk that will be going to a referendum this November. We'll take a look at some renderings, and then we'll talk about the Austin Transit Partnership, which is a limited government corporation that will be overseeing the delivery of the project if it is approved in November, and then just open it up to questions. So I think the first thing that I'll do, hopefully you've seen this in some other venue at this point, but if not, I hope you enjoy. It's just a 30-second overview that you may see on a television sometimes.
Project Connect from Capital Metro is the comprehensive transit plan designed to connect Austin, including 3 new rail lines, north and south, east Austin, a tunnel through downtown, and a direct route to and from the airport, and all-electric buses and more routes. Learn about the plan at projectconnect.com.
I think the most important thing to focus on there is if you need more information, projectconnect.com is the place to get it. And while I'll be walking through things today, again, a lot of the materials are going to be available for you there on the website. So first, let's talk about the system plan generally. I think this is an important point to point out the legalese here on the bottom left-hand side. In particular, the entire system plan was approved unanimously by City Council and the Capital Metro Board in June. And then a smaller initial investment was approved, again, unanimously by the board and by Austin City Council in July. And so the system plan is a $10 billion plan. The initial investment is a $7.1 billion plan. And again, as we go through this, I'll break down what is in one and what is not in the other. So first, with the system plan, it includes many different ways of getting around the city, and you'll find that's a theme for Capital Metro. There's no one particular way that we need to address mobility in the region. And so the plan includes many different ways, including light rail. It's proposing 3 new light rail lines, Metro Rapid, which currently we have 2 Metro Rapids, the 801 and the 803. And this proposes going to 7 Metro Rapid lines. Then for Metro Rail, which is commuter rail, we currently have the red line, and we're proposing another with the green line. Then an addition of Metro Express, which are those commuter carriages that'll take you out to and from the suburbs, usually during morning and evening rush. Then additional improvements to Metro Bus and our paratransit service. All of this is going to be done with an all-electric bus fleet. We're also going to be adding more on-demand pickup service, which works kind of like Uber or Lyft, except a small bus comes to you and will drop you off in a drop zone. And certainly in the Q&A, if you have more questions about that, I can show you a little bit more detail. And then because of all of this construction, we'll need a new maintenance facility that'll be included in the plan. So first, let's get started with the general concept of light rail on the street. So this is how we imagine it. And again, you can see it's an all of the above strategy. There's room for people to walk and bike, to drive, to ride transit, whether you're able to walk there or come in a wheelchair. In addition to that, you'll notice there are street trees. The stations themselves may look different in different parts of the city. This one is showing a left-hand turn lane, and that if that were the case, we may split the station across an intersection rather than it all being clustered on one side of an intersection. And then the real key here is that with light rail, it's running mostly in the corridor. So it'll be on the street, it may be above or below it at places, but this kind of begs the question of what's the difference between commuter rail and light rail? Because a lot of times people think that the red line that's currently running is light rail, and it is not light rail. So I think the easiest way to conceptualize that is, there's heavy rail, which traditionally meant a third rail that was electrified, and if you touched it, you died. And then light rail, which felt like a train just like that, except there was no third rail. The electricity was above, and therefore it was like you could pick it up and put it in the street and you didn't have to worry about it. So the distinction between heavy rail and light rail was made at that time. Now, in Austin, we don't use the third electrified rail. We have diesel-powered commuter rail cars. But again, another distinction is that when you have a diesel-powered engine, it takes a while for it to get going and for it to stop. Unlike a light rail car, which would be run with an electric system, and you can start and stop easily. So the light rail system will run much more frequently, like 5-minute headways, making many more stops, the way a local bus might make more stops downtown. While commuter rail, even though we're going to have some improvements when downtown station opens, it generally runs less frequently. So a 15-minute or 30-minute headway max, and really distant stops, because it's really meant for people going into and out of the city versus circulation within the city. But I'm digressing. So this is what light rail looks like conceptually on the corridors. And to take a dive into that, I'd like to walk through each of these lines. And again, I'm going to point things out that this map right here is for the orange line, and this is the map for the whole system plan. The initial investment is a little smaller than that. So just to begin, if you currently ride the 801, the orange line is going to look very similar because it starts at Tech Ridge, it comes down Lamar, At the triangle, it joins the Transit Mall on Guadalupe Lavaca. And when it crosses a river, it'll switch over to Congress Avenue and go all the way down to Slaughter. And that's what the 801 does today. The initial investment, however, will start at the North Lamar Transit Center, so that's 183 in Lamar, and it'll end at Stastny and Congress. And the reason why is that the area north of 183 and the area south of Stastny technically is a TxDOT right-of-way. The city is negotiating that, but the land swap isn't guaranteed quite yet, and that makes it hard to seek federal funds for service there until we know what the walking conditions are going to be like in that area. I think in the previous discussion, you were talking about the pedestrian situation at Stastny, and I think that holds up, that that pedestrian environment is part of what you're looking for to make an effective transit system. Anyway, this shows some of the destinations you might use on the orange line. The blue line, now I will say this map is of the system plan, but also the entire blue line is part of the initial investment. So they're one and the same. It would start also at North Lamar Transit Center at 183 in Lamar and come downtown. And when it gets to Republic Square, it would be going through the downtown tunnel to the convention center and then across the river on a new crossing that would be for bike, ped, and transit, no cars on this crossing, to get to Riverside and then take Riverside all the way out to the airport. And the airport does plan to bring us to the terminal. So you can take a look at that blue line right there. Again, the orange and the blue line would be the initial light rail lines. Now, I'm going to talk here for a second about the green line, and I'll come back to the gold in a second. So the green line, as I mentioned, is commuter rail. And the red line currently starts at Downtown Station, and kind of looks like that guy. And it heads east. It goes to Plaza Saltillo, and then the red line turns and heads northwest out to the suburbs in Leander. The green line's similar in that it starts in the same place, but after Plaza Saltillo, it would continue heading east, first with a new stop at 5th and Pleasant Valley, then over to Springdale, kind of near where the Canopy is. There's an emerging arts district there at Springdale Airport area. Then a new park and ride at 183, and then over to Loyola, and then Colony Park. And you'll notice on this map, this is a dotted line that heads to Manor and Elgin. And the reason why is, first, this area is part of the system plan, but not the initial investment. The initial investment goes from Colony Park downtown. Now, just like the red line, Capital Metro already owns and operates this rail line as a freight line. And I can tell you that freight doesn't care how bumpy the ride is. So these tracks are going to have to be updated to have commuters on them. But we are making the same play, suggesting that people can ride on these tracks that we're already operating. But it is a City of Austin tax rate election. And so it made sense to stop the service at Colony Park and then wait for Manor and Elgin to participate before we talk about extending that line further out. In just a second, I'll talk about the time frame for these different services coming online. Again, you can see some of the destinations included. And again, this is commuter rail, so it'll be more likely a 15-minute at peak and 30-minute off-peak versus light rail, which could have 5- and 10-minute service frequencies. All right, so we're moving over to Metro Rapid, and I know you're thinking like, wait a second, you said you were gonna talk about the gold line, and I am, and it's hidden on this map, so I'm gonna point it out to you and also say that in the next week, we're getting an updated slide deck so that this information is easier to see. Again, this is showing the entire system plan, and I'll point out what is in the initial investment. So first, starting with the gold line, when it launches, the gold line is going to be Metro Rapid. There is some interest in testing out bus rapid transit in this corridor, and part of the reason why is that if you look at the Campo estimates for population, it won't be until the 2040s before we really start overfilling the bus rapid transit. So we're proposing launching with Metro Rapid and then upgrading it to light rail. But when it first launches, it'll start at Highland, ACC, kind of where the red line currently starts, and it will take the eastern alignment through downtown. It'll go through the Sanjak and Trinity side of downtown. Now, if you're at UT, you know that there's some construction going on over there with the new stadium. And so there's been some discussion about the potential for this line in the future as light rail, because San Jacinto is technically in a floodplain, Red River may be realigned, Deadman might become Red River. With all those unknowns, it also made sense to start as Metro Rapid. So anyway, Highland, the eastern alignment, and it'll bring you down to the downtown station so that you can interact with the various rail lines that come there. And also so that you're not going through the main part of the transit mall, you're taking an alternative route that has less traffic. It would then cut across town to Republic Square, and that's where it would stop as a Metro Rapid. Now, once it becomes light rail, when it gets to Republic Square, it would also head south on Congress and end at Ben White Boulevard. So it would share some of that track with the orange line. And again, there are economies of scale with sharing track, just like the blue line and orange line share the northern alignment. The orange and gold line would share the southern alignment. That reduces your cost per mile, something like that, and also provides more frequent service for somebody sitting on the side of the street. All right, enough about the gold line. The Expo Center is the next Metro Rapid that'll be running. And if you ride today, the 20, the northern leg of the 20 pretty much covers this. You know, you head out on Manor Road and it ends at the Delco Center. So the Expo Center line would continue running through Loyola all the way to the Expo Center. That's the Expo Center line. But also another key difference, the 20 today goes around Mueller. This instead would turn onto 51st Street and run through Mueller on Berkman. Berkman has always been designed to be a transit-oriented boulevard and currently has the high-frequency 10 and the high-frequency 335 there. We're proposing adding the Expo Center line there as well. And then once it gets over by the medical school, it would also use that eastern alignment through downtown. So again, if you were a 20 user, normally you have to go all the way across town and then through UT and the Capitol complex to get downtown. This would avoid that by heading directly to the that's the Expo line. Then there's the Pleasant Valley line, which would go from Goodnight Ranch all the way up to Mueller. So again, another high frequency service on Berkman, plus the addition of new service on Airport Boulevard, that would be high frequency. And then further, this is a connection across the river that allows somebody who lives southeast to get to Central East without having to go downtown and make a switch and head back over. So this is providing much more direct, less trafficked crossings of the river on the east side of town. Then there's the Burnett Metro Rapid, and this is going to look a lot like the 803, but there are some key differences that people haven't spoken about. So first, you know, the 803 today goes from up in the Domain, and it goes all the way down to the Westgate Transit Center, which is Ben White Boulevard. And you can already see one of the changes is that it would continue down Menchac all the way down to Slaughter. It would also continue all the way southwest to Oak Hill. And how will that be achieved? Well, first, the Metro Rapid will be running 5-minute frequencies so that you can achieve 10-minute frequencies on these tails. So you might get an 803 that's heading to Oak Hill or an 803 that's headed to Tanglewood. So that's the first addition, is that we have this new 15-minute service headed south. In addition to that, up at the top, as Burnett Road is updated, we'll make stops on Burnett Road rather than diverting over to the Pickle campus. So actually making stops at McCalla on Burnett Road or at South End on Burnett Road. Further, it currently comes down to the Triangle at Sunshine Station, and normally the 803 uses the Transit Mall. And this is proposing instead using Lamar as the high frequency corridor, because there's currently no high frequency service on that section of Lamar. Here's Peace Park in downtown. And when it got to Whole Foods, it would zigzag to Republic Square just to meet up with the other buses and then head back on its normal path. And I mention this because, our bus service is where most of the riders are, and yet a lot of the coverage has been about just the rail lines, even though Metro Rapid is likely to host a lot of people and also come online sooner. So the ones that are in the plan but are not in the initial investment are the Palmer Lane section, the ACC Highland to Tech Ridge, and then these two other ones, the MLK line and the Crosstown line. Now with these two, this is currently the 4, and it's a high frequency line already. And then this is the 18, and it's currently a 15-minute route as well. So it felt like it would be better to provide new service requests than to prioritize upgrading existing high frequency service. Even still, I'll point out that there isn't service on these corridors either, and that's why they're in the system plan, even though they're not in the initial investment. So some renderings. This is what Republic Square Station would look like downtown. If you've been to the Dallas airport, you know what it's like to have the elevator doors open when the vehicle approaches. Part of the reason for that is to provide air conditioning in this space, which will be important during certain times of the year. In addition, if you go up this stairway to the mezzanine, this is what it would look like conceptually with ticketing information, bathrooms, places to eat and shop, as well as for public art. It's designed to be like an extension of the airport. This is a concept for park and ride station. Some things to point out here include public restrooms, which has long been requested, an integration with B-Cycle, which very shortly will be rebranded as Metro Bike, and that's because Capital Metro is taking over the B-Cycle system and will be electrifying the entire fleet over time. And so these would be those electric storage docks, in addition to scooters and docks and scooters without docks, and places to charge cars as well would be part of the standard park and ride station. This is what it looks like when it becomes a regional station. This might be appropriate for something like North Lamar Transit Center, where you have train and bus, maybe even regional providers like Megabus could be here. And when you have this much space, you also have room to build places for people to live and work and shop, even places for structured parking. So diving into the initial investment just a little bit more, I just want to point out, I think it's easier to point this out on our website. So if you're here on projectconnect.com and you slide down the page, you could get to the initial investment map. And when you're in there, you can see like you'd still, if I zoom in really close, I'm still in a 2-slide situation. But what I wanted to point out here is if it's a dotted line, it's part of the system plan, but not the initial investment. That's true throughout. So you can see here's the orange line, that's part of the system plan. And then at North Lamar, it becomes part of that initial investment all the way until you get to the south side. And then you can see again, this section here will still be served by Metro Rapid, but the rail line will start at Stastny. Something else that I think is worth pointing out is these P's. These mean park and rides, and if they're gray, they're existing park and rides. But if they're blue, that means they're new park and rides that are proposed. So here's the Wildflower Center, for example. If once MOPAC has a toll lane on it, then this will be an appropriate addition because there'll be a managed lane for an express bus service. In addition, you can see these little C swirly gig things. Those are pickup services. And again, pickup is an on-demand service that you can currently use in several different parts of the city. And I'm actually pulling up a slide from a completely different presentation just to show that to you. Pickup sends a vehicle just like this. It works like Uber or Lyft. You call us, preferably using the app, Pickup by Cap Metro. A vehicle shows up in 15 minutes or less, and it'll pick you up door to door. So it'll bring you anywhere within a drop zone. We have these drop zones in place currently, although Lago Vista just started with us, and Pflugerville is about to in October. But the idea is, you know, for example, let's say you took the 18 from campus and you went to Mozart's. Maybe you want to go and see the peacocks in Mayfield Park. So you could call the pickup here and it'll bring you up to the top of this zone, even though there isn't a bus in that area. Now, I'm bringing this up mostly just because, you know, I think it's important to point out how pickup would provide service to people who live in areas that don't necessarily have the same level of rail service. So, for example, here's, you know, Southwest Austin, and you've got Wildflower Center as a park and ride, and you have Oak Hill as a park and ride, but you can see there's not high frequency service over here. But if you have a circulator in this area, it can be picking people up from their home and bringing them to the park and ride, so they don't have to store a car at our park and ride all day that they never use. Currently, you know, you would tell people go park and ride at Westgate Transit Center, but the goal again would be to keep people in their neighborhood and make it so that it's an expo service, kind of like your elevator is an expo service in a building. So sequencing is the key. People ask us often when these things will be delivered. So first, I just want to point out there is the NEPA, which is environmental review and preliminary engineering process, followed by the design and procurement process, and then the actual construction work. And you can see for light rail, it'll take a year or so to get through that process, then get prepared for the build, and it'll take about 5 years to build. So light rail should start by the end of the 2020s. For the red line, there's a continuum of improvements that are happening presently. And again, very soon, downtown station will be opening, I think before the end of the year. And at that point, you'll start seeing more frequent service there because we can store more trains downtown. But the green line, I'm just going to point this out, the environmental work isn't going to start until the light rail lines are about to be delivered. So while light rail is a 2020s project, the green line is going to be a 2030s project. In addition to that, for Metro Rapid, you can see it's a much shorter time frame. So within just a handful of years, all of those Metro Rapids we talked about will be in place. And the gold line will be the last one delivered. And it's partly because of the NEPA process here. We're going to go ahead and do the process as though we're building out light rail, rather than have to go through two separate processes afterwards. You can see a continuum for our other bus services. Right here for customer tech, that's going to be a new fare collection system so that you can bring a credit card on board, so you can tap without having to open up an app, and also so we can implement fare capping so that if paying for a monthly pass all in one go is too expensive, you can instead pay and earn a pass as you ride. And then in addition to that, the plan includes $300 million for anti-displacement measures, because we want to make sure that as we deliver new stations, that we're keeping the cultural integrity in place, that people aren't, particularly renters, are still able to stay in the area should they choose. We'll again be putting together a citizen advisory committee for that. And so I can't tell you all of the tactics and strategies that will go into it, but I assume that they will be different given in different parts of the city. So finally, the Austin Transit Partnership. It's important to note that Project Connect is a project that Capital Metro and the City of Austin are partnering on. And in fact, it's the City of Austin that is hosting the tax rate election, not Capital Metro. And so as funds are received for it, they'll be going to the Austin Transit Partnership, not sitting with Capital Metro, not sitting with the City of Austin. And so just to clarify that again, the city is going to be asking voters to participate in a property tax election. And that's the funding that they will get. Then Capital Metro has its own funds, plus we will be responsible for seeking federal matching funds. Currently, the expectation is about a 45% match. Those funds will all be brought to the Austin Transit Partnership, which will be responsible for governance for overseeing financing and releasing funds for bonds, as well as overseeing the planning and implementation process to make sure that we're doing what we said we would do. And then as projects are delivered, they would be operated by Capital Metro, not the transit partnership. So that's all the comments that I had prepared, and I'm happy to answer questions. But again, I want to direct you to projectconnect.com for more information. And if you need something beyond that, feedback at projectconnect.com. Somebody will reply back with an email if you need more data than you can find on the site. All right, it looks like chat's already hopping. Let's see, I'm curious about the planned underground station. Would this extension of the airport be considered a public space? Can anyone enter and stay there? Okay, so this is really getting more into the security issues. So yes, it's a public space. Republic Square currently is a public space. It's a public park. And it's a combination of factors that go into securing the platform. So we do work with the Downtown Austin Alliance that have some ambassadors. We also work with APD, who often are patrolling or doing lane control. And in addition to that, Capital Metro has its own security team, which currently are made up of off-duty APD officers, but we're planning to put up our own group separate from APD in the future. Let's see.
Can I ask a question about the stations as well?
Yeah.
When do they fit into the timeline? When will they be built out? Like immediately?
The downtown tunnel?
I guess the different transit stations, the Republic one, and I think there was another one.
Well, so, you know, again, we're expecting light rail to get delivered by 2029. I would assume that the downtown tunnel is going to be one of the earlier projects that are worked on because, you know, everything's going to need to get through there for it to work. So it would make sense to get that part started. And actually, I can show you, since I didn't really cover that in the presentation, that if you are looking at the map, it does show the downtown tunnel area in this inset, and it's also right here on the map. Sorry again for the scrolling. I can always bring you to the map that's on the website. So you can see right here, it's under 4th Street. There's a little section from the boathouse to the convention center. And then there's a section from about like, I don't know, 10th Street to the river. That'll be a tunnel. So it would make sense to do a boring tool there at the earlier part of the project. And then the stations themselves would be delivered on a rolling basis afterwards. I think the important point for you is we're not proposing digging up the entire length of everything all at the same time. There are best practices in construction delivery, and you can go more in a block by block progression rather than just have everything in the same state for years at a time.
Yeah, I guess my question was related to my other, maybe someone else has a question, but I was wondering about the capacity of these stations because a lot of current red line stations feel over capacity, like they're overbuilt for the amount of service that people are using them for. I wonder if you guys have even, the renderings seem so large and they have so many pickup stations for buses, and I'm curious if you really will be building all that.
Yeah, so that is the plan. Republic Square Station, the underground tunnel is going to wind up having at least, you know, the 3 light rails coming through. You also have to future-proof your system. If you keep following 4th Street across town, you're going to find that it runs over to Seaholm, and Seaholm is where the Union Pacific line comes through. So it's not beyond, you know, our future view that, you know, Republic Square might be taking on fully cross-town traffic versus downtown station today. Even still, part of the capacity issues for the red line have been because we didn't have double tracking in place. And we, as a result, and also the downtown station was underbuilt initially. It was a temporary station. So in the morning, we didn't have a place to park trains downtown, and we weren't able to pass other trains. Also, we're not able to operate when freight is running. These were all part of the 2004 election. And the idea then was to get rail started without asking the feds for a match. And the idea was that Project Connect would get in front of voters again a little bit later, and the upgrades would be made. And so we're just now at the point that we're upgrading the red line to the service level we were hoping for when we opened it. And certainly if you've been a morning or evening rush rider, you know that it gets to capacity pretty easily.
I've only been during quarantine, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, right now it's empty.
Yeah.
We have a question in the chat. The question being, since this partnership with the City of Austin, has the city committed to improving pedestrian conditions around the new stops and stations?
My answer is yes. It's important to note that the City of Austin is responsible for the roads and what bike and pedestrian infrastructure is there. Capital Metro is responsible for providing transit service. Even still, we recognize that people cannot get to transit service if they can't walk to it. And so for many years, we've been building sidewalks to get our system to 99% ADA compliance. Even still, we've been working with the city and Travis County. You know, they're fond of putting affordable housing projects in different parts of the city. And you can't go to Far East Austin and put affordable housing and then expect the transit to show up, especially if it's a rural road that has no sidewalk on it and we can't even stop a bus. So we have experience with doing it, but again, it's really not in our purview. Even still, with this plan, we have $150 million built into it, because if we do something like, we're ripping up South Congress, it's our responsibility to restore it from door to door. So we will be building sidewalks and bike lanes and putting in street trees and platforms that support that. We also are working very closely with the City of Austin on things like pedestrian hybrid beacons and other things that are transit supportive infrastructure. But again, yes, $150 million is in this plan for bike and pedestrian upgrades so that people can more easily access these stations.
Ming, you had a question, your hand was raised.
Yes. Hello, Mr. Stern. First of all, I just want to say a big thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and to give us a brief on Project Connect. Thanks on behalf of our center, CM2, and on behalf of our class and our CM2 community as well. I have multiple questions, but I'll just ask one at a time and giving other people chances.
Okay.
Question, well, I guess for sure is about a TOD. As you recall that I emailed you our class plan. Cap Metro has already had a TOD tool online for the red line. I wonder if Cap Metro has already had one or a plan to have a TOD update that will go along with the new proposed Project Connect system. Just like for example, Dallas DART has the long-range TOD plan going along with their transit plan as well. So curious.
So I've just put two links into the chat. One is Capital Metro's TOD tool. And you should know that land use is really regulated by cities. And we're sort of caught somewhere in between. So in the lead up to the red line vote, the City of Austin put in place a TOD policy that pretty much was focused on rail stations. And if you are a regular transit rider, you know that you get the most people walking when the service is frequent. So, red line stations running 30-minute and 60-minute frequency and not all weekend long or not late at night aren't necessarily the best places to be putting TOD districts. So the first stab at trying to break the rail hegemony was with the TOD tool from Capital Metro. And the goal was to highlight Metro Rapid as a potential for TOD designation, and looking at all those stations. And so you can really take a deep dive there to take a look at that. Further, the Urban Land Institute recently produced a white paper about TOD in Austin and said that any place that high frequency service intersects should be ripe for a TOD. And so an example of that might be at Lamar, South Lamar and Old Torf. You know, there's no train coming there, but it's got the high frequency 803, and it also has the Crosstown 300 route, both of which come there, plus the 3, which is not high frequency, but you're talking about 3 lines that are intersecting right where Black Sheep Lodge and Lauro are. And yet you're sitting there with a CVS and an Office Depot instead of it being a vibrant transit-oriented development. So I think the idea is progressing in the community. Capital Metro doesn't officially have a position on this, but I can assure you that in working with the city, we're trying to make the case that if you want transit to be successful, people need to live and work and play and shop around those areas easily by walking. And then they're more likely to use transit to get to and from that spot.
Thank you.
There was a question in here about the MOPAC toll lanes. So, and then it talks about dedicated guideways. So I think first, the key thing to know is that all of the light rail and commuter rail are going to be using dedicated transit ways. So these vehicles will not be stuck in traffic. The tunnel is designed also so that we're not creating traffic when we come through downtown. In addition to that though, with Metro Rapid, the city has expressed interest in priority lanes, which we know, priority means generally the buses, but it also means people on bikes and people turning right and people breaking the law. And that's not the same as a dedicated transit way. There's been some interest at the city level to experiment with our Metro Rapid lines and offer more and more dedication, but we don't have a guarantee of that at this time. Even still, if you look at our express services, we have some that are running on MOPAC using the toll lane and some that don't. We also have express services that run on I-35. And I can tell you that the express buses that use the toll lane on MOPAC are very popular because they're much faster than any other vehicle that gets stuck in the traffic. So we have been working with the Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority so that if they extend the toll lane south of the river on MOPAC, they would again provide free access for our transit vehicles through that lane. And while it isn't dedicated, the priority alone does speed up service. And so it's something that we're interested in pursuing and being part of more and more. If the state goes back to putting managed lanes on I-35, we would also be interested in running there. So a station near the new soccer stadium is a question. So I can tell you 2 things about that. Well, first, there's the Kramer station, which, let's see, maybe I'll just open up Cap Metro, just so you can see the system map. So let me share my screen so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm on the website and I'm going to go to schedules and maps, and I'm just going to click on the system map, and we'll zoom in a little. All right, so you can see, just by the way, anything in pink is coming every 15 minutes or better. Things that are green are coming every 30. So just by the way, if you've not ridden yet, I like to tell people think pink, because pink is high frequency service. When you get to the top, you can see that the 803 goes directly into the north side of the domain, but the train itself stops at Kramer Station, and this is a long walk. It's partly because we had some land that was here, and The city owns some land here, and we thought we might make a park and ride there, but it never materialized. So we've been talking to the owners of the property where IBM sits now. And there's an announcement coming shortly for the creation of a new train station here. I think you can look online. Well, I would look for Broadmoor Station and see what you find. I think Brandywine Realty is working on that. But there'll be a new station here, which makes a much easier pedestrian crossing into the domain. And just for unnecessary background, the southern side of the domain, when it was first created by Simon Mall, they didn't want people coming there by transit. Highland Mall had just died this horrible death, and they didn't want those people arriving. And so we weren't allowed on there for years until there was a citizen-led campaign about it. But the north side, however, that's Endeavor Real Estate. They've been building a mixed-use campus from the beginning. So they really, they made that space for us with the bus station. And now Brandywine is building the train station right here. Now, if you go slightly below, right here to where Breaker is, this is where the McCalla Soccer Stadium is going to be. And they're in discussion with us for having a station here as well. It'll be another public-private partnership, but I don't think the funds are there yet, so I don't have anything that I know is coming imminently, even though I know that we want to build it. But when that happens, when this station opens and this station opens, this station will probably go away. And when that does, there'll probably be a rethinking of the Breaker Lane service because of the soccer stadium.
Oh, we have another question. Cap Metro serves the greater Austin region beyond City of Austin limits. Will Cap Metro build partnerships with other cities, Round Rock, Cedar Park, Leander, for Project Connect?
So yes, we're always doing that. In fact, Round Rock has limited Capital Metro service. And the reason why is they, the way that cities normally join Capital Metro is they dedicate 1 penny of sales tax. Some cities have dedicated that to another purpose, and Round Rock is one of those. They're using it for their chamber. So they're buying a la carte services from us. And so they don't get the same robust level of service. They're not getting 15-minute frequencies and full coverage in their city, but they are buying an express bus and a few local buses that connect to Tech Ridge or to the train station. And we're seeing more of that happen. So Pflugerville, for example, they're not ready for a fixed route, but they want pickup so that people in Pflugerville can get to Tech Ridge and get on this service. We've also been talking to Buda, who's interested in an express bus. We've spoken to Lakeway, who, believe it or not, they built so much retail and they don't have enough people to work the retail. So suddenly they're interested in having us provide bus service out there. We'll see what happens. Bastrop is still considered rural, so we're still a few years away from that, but Mainer's on board, etc. Cedar Park is strange because they don't participate and they've not expressed interest in it, partly because the station's nearby and they're benefiting from it. Leander is involved in Capital Metro. That's why they not only have the train station there, they also have pickup so that if you live in Leander, again, you don't have to park at the station. You can stay parked at home, but we'll pick you up and drop you off.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lonnie. Really appreciate you taking the time to answer our questions. It doesn't seem like there are any other questions in our chat or hands being raised. So I don't know if you would like to make any sort of closing statements, or Ming, if you would like to say anything else before we all say goodbye and good afternoon.
Sure. I would recommend going to projectconnect.com. I'm giving the general email address, feedback@projectconnect.com. This is also my Cap Metro email address if you need to be pointed in the right direction for anything or you don't hear back from folks. And then on top of it, we're trying to make sure that as many people as possible know about Project Connect. There's certainly people speaking in favor or opposed. We're just talking on the subject. And if you're part of another group, whether it's a class, school, church, office, I'm here to be exploited. So if you send me an email, I will come out and host another presentation like this for another group. Just let me know.
Well, I will jump in, Sandra. Thank you again. Oh, sorry. Thank you again, Mr. Stern, for the wonderful presentation, a full picture about Project Connect. It looks so promising. I just hope that this dream of Project Connect will come into reality very soon. And your talk attracts lots of people, lots of interest here. I just want, or if you don't mind, Cisco, I would just point to that the person who asked question about the soccer stadium, he is our school's associate dean. And
oh, wow.
So, welcome to our CM2 Brownbag, Cisco.
Thank you. Yes, I've particularly subject that's particularly close to my heart. I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for taking the time out to be here. I appreciate it.
Great. And then our students may have follow-up, or for sure we'll have follow-up questions for you or for your colleagues at Cap Metro when the semester goes on. We're working on the projects. Hopefully, we can learn more about Cap Metro's interest in serving the region, the community, and our work can also help Cap Metro to achieve the purposes.
Yeah, I'm very encouraged by this group. And certainly I may not be the right contact for everything at Cap Metro, but I can certainly connect you to the right person as needed.
Great. Thank you again.
All righty, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you so much. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you all.